Is Jacksonville finally ready to take the AFC South throne? Let's talk about it.
Let's go.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dynasty After Dark. I'm your host, Calvin Timms. I'm excited to be talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars here today. Another one of the breakdowns of the full team, the full offense, and that's what we're going to be getting into. We're going to be talking about every skill player here today, and I'm just going to be giving some of my thoughts, my projections for the 2024 season and the next couple of years as well. And Jacksonville's a very interesting team. The AFC South is very wide open. Everyone is kind of penciling in the Houston Texans to be the favorite of that division. The Indianapolis Colts, they're right there in that mix too, and it feels like the Jaguars are going to jag, and they're going to end up shooting themselves in the foot again. But just 2 years ago, the Jaguars won this whole division, and I do think that things can turn around really quickly in the South, and I would not be surprised if Jacksonville wins this division this year. And I'm going to give you some reasons why I like a lot of their players at value in Dynasty right now, and it's going to be a whole, football approach, but also just Dynasty specific. And we're going to talk about their current ADPs, their current values, and why I like most of these guys above that. And we're going to have a good time here today. If you haven't, please subscribe to the channel. If you're new, please subscribe to the channel to hear all of our content as we continue to come out with it. Dale and I actually just had an amazing idea for a weekly show we're going to start doing here in the next couple of weeks. Got to figure out a few details behind it, but it's going to be a really fun one. If you like fantasy receipts, you're going to love this content. So trust me when I say this will be a good one. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you guys can hear all of that when it does come out. And if you can, leave a like on the video and just leave a comment down below. Let me know who you're excited to hear me talk about and break down next. I've got a few teams that people have recommended, and I just love to hear your guys' thoughts as well. So please leave a comment down below on that or anything else you're feeling like talking about. So last thing too, really quickly, if you can, follow me on Twitter at TDC_Calvin, FF After Dark for the podcast, and Dynasty_Dale for my co-host who's going to be back on the next episode as well. And last thing, I do want to just preface you guys and just let you guys know, come fall this year, we're going to have a little bit of an interesting transition for the podcast. Both Dale and I are going to have kids about a week apart. So just kind of worked out that way. And so we're going to be tired and exhausted, and we're going to figure it out. We'll make something work from the podcast. Maybe I'm going to try and get a couple of other hosts in here to kind of help guest fill for Dale or for myself. But we're going to figure it out. So this fall, it's going to be a little bit of a interesting transition, but we're gonna get something going for you guys to make sure that we still give you guys content that you want to hear. So that said, thank you guys for checking this video out. Let's get into the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I want to start with the top. I want to start with Trevor Lawrence, who's only 24. Last year was a little bit of a mediocre season compared to the expectations. This guy was billed as the next Andrew Luck. He was the prototypical, the generational quarterback that was going to come and save the Jacksonville Jaguars. Urban Meyer did not help that out in his rookie season. His sophomore year with Doug Peterson, things were looking a lot better, and people expected him to take a massive leap forward. And this last year was a little bit of a downgrade. The weapons weren't as good. He didn't have as many touchdowns, more interceptions, took more risks down the field, a little bit more rushing yards, but finished as quarterback 8 in his second year with Doug Peterson. Well, his first year with Doug Peterson, second year in the NFL, 13 last year. And people feel like they have kind of given up on Trevor Lawrence. And to kind of back that, he's currently the Dynasty quarterback number 13. He's going behind Kyler Murray, Jaden Daniels, right ahead of Dak Prescott, Tua, Brock Purdy, these guys. And I do think that it's a little premature to give up on Trevor Lawrence. He's only 24 years old. He's a very young kid. And I think that Calvin Ridley I don't dislike Calvin Ridley, but I think a lot of people thought that Calvin Ridley was going to be the savior for this offense and the savior for Trevor Lawrence that he did not end up being. There were so many plays last year where Calvin Ridley just did not get it done. And it's very indicative if you look at his actual game log last year. It was very hot and cold. Some games he had really good game and performances, and then others he just completely disappeared. And I think a lot of people put that more on Trevor Lawrence than on Calvin Ridley. But obviously the team did not feel comfortable bringing Calvin Ridley back because they would have had to give up a second-round pick to the Atlanta Falcons if they would have re-signed him to a long-term contract. And they were perfectly fine letting him go. First, one of the first signings on free agency this year, they signed Gabe Davis as the replacement for Calvin Ridley. And everyone said, oh, what a downgrade, what a downgrade. People still hate on Gabe Davis, but the thing is, I think that Gabe Davis is an actual better fit for this offense and what Doug Peterson wants to do and Trevor Lawrence wants to do. And I think it's going to be a net positive for Trevor Lawrence. Just take whatever your feelings about Gabe Davis are out of it. Every other week last year for the Bills, he was going off and just absolutely destroying for fantasy football. So, I think that he's a good receiver, and I think he's going to fit a very specific role for this team, and it's going to be very valuable for Trevor Lawrence. You look at the other guys. They drafted Brian Thomas in the first round. They still have Travis Etienne. They have Tank Bigsby. They tried to improve the offensive line as well. They still have Evan Ingram. So this offense is just completely loaded. And I do like that a lot for Trevor Lawrence. It's all going to kind of funnel to him where a little bit more rushing yards. I think that they're going to try and scheme him open on the design run plays a little bit more this year. You saw a little bit of an uptick in that, 70 rushing attempts last year. And he's a very mobile, athletic guy. And the biggest thing, so, only 21 touchdowns the last couple of years, 25 in the second year. It's just, he hasn't been able to get to that 30 mark, which would make him a very valuable fantasy asset. And I do think that he can get there this year with Christian Kirk, with Brian Thomas Jr., with Gabe Davis and Evan Ingram. It's just a very, very loaded offense. And I think that, Trevor Lawrence, I would be trying to buy right now if I'm trying to get a quarterback in fantasy. I just think that the floor, this is basically his floor for the rest of his career, is at quarterback number 13. If he can turn it around and if he can actually hit, now that he's kind of got a little bit of the Doug Peterson, they're building the offense around him, I think that it's just going to be, a massive misvalue if you don't upgrade on Trevor Lawrence right now. If he does hit that ceiling where he can finish as a yearly top 7, there's no reason why he can't finish higher than Joe Burrow, who is massively overvalued compared to Trevor Lawrence. With the injury risk and everything for Joe Burrow, I just don't see why there's such a big gap. Joe Burrow is currently the quarterback number 8. So 13 to 8, it sounds small, right? But in Superflex, that's a big gap. You're talking just from for example, Brock Purdy to Kyler Murray is a 4-player gap, right? Not massive, but that's about the equivalent of the 112 to the 2-3, somewhere in that range, like a very late first or an early second, which is a lot of investment in one of these quarterbacks. So Trevor Lawrence to Joe Burrow, offered Trevor Lawrence for Joe Burrow, and see how quickly that gets declined for you. So I do think that Trevor Lawrence is at the floor of his value. He will never get lower than this, and he has a very high chance, in my opinion, of finishing higher. And we're going to talk about some of the weapons here and why I like them. And we're going to start with Gabe Davis, who was the first free agent that they signed this year. I think he was like the second player signed. It was pretty nice to see I have a lot of shares of Gabe Davis. So, full transparency, I have a little bit of bias in me, but here's why I like Gabe Davis. Everyone's saying, oh, it's just a 1-year thing, right? Oh, it's just a 1-year thing. But it's not, because they signed Gabe Davis to a 3-year deal for a lot of money. $24 million guaranteed, $39 million contract, 24 fully guaranteed. Okay, they could probably cut him after this year, right? Well, next year he's a $6 million cap hit with a $20 million dead cap. loss. So they would lose $14 million by moving on from Gabe Davis next year. And you say, okay, all right, well, year 3 of his contract, that's when they can get rid of him, right? Yeah, you could save $3 million. He's going to be a $17 million cap hit in 2026 for $14.5 million dead cap. So you save about $2.5 million. Is it really worth it? You know, I think that Gabe Davis is going to be in the long-term plans for this team. The person that I think is going to be on the outs for this offense is going to be Christian Kirk. After this year, you know, he's in an option year as of right now. Next year, he's a $28 million cap hit with only a $13 million dead cap hit. So I think that Christian Kirk is going to be the one that's on the outs with this team, and that's why they drafted Brian Thomas Jr., who is another guy that's very valuable right now in fantasy. People really like him, especially compared to both of the other guys. Brian Thomas is ranked as the wide receiver number 28. Christian Kirk is number 40, and Gabe Davis is all the way at the bottom at number 66. And, you know, that's the equivalent of a early third for Gabe Davis. And Christian Kirk, you know, mid-second, a whole round difference there. Brian Thomas, obviously, the end of the first round in your rookie drafts if you've been going through those. I like Brian Thomas a lot. I really do. Long-term, I love him. Year 1, I don't love him a lot. He's going to be the number 3 weapon in this offense at least, right? Evan Ingram's going to be in there. Travis Etienne, he can catch passes as well. You know, 73 targets last year. I know that they want to kind of pull some of that out of that. But Christian Kirk last year finishes the wide receiver number 47, 85 targets, 57 catches, 787 yards. First year with Doug Peterson, finishes the wide receiver number 11. You know, big difference in targets. 133 targets in his first year with Doug Peterson compared to 85 last year. I know he's banged up for 5 games, so he probably would have been right around there, 120, 130. So Christian Kirk is still a very good player, but the reason why I'm going to try and sell you here on Gabe Davis, the last 2 years, 93 targets in 2022, 81 targets in 2023, 48 catches in 2022, 45 last year with Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. 7 touchdowns both seasons. He's had 7, 7, 6, and 7 touchdowns his all 4 years of his career so far. You know, hasn't broken 1,000 yards yet. You know, they paid him $13 million average per year. Oh, it's not a ton of money. It's not Justin Jefferson money. It's not Amon-Ra St. Brown money, but he needs to prove himself. And I think that this is the perfect opportunity. They're going to use him on the outside, which is why he's a better fit than Calvin Ridley was in this offense. They tried to use Calvin Ridley as a 1 and X on the outside, and Christian Kirk was a lot in the slot last year. And I do think that that's a mistake given what Calvin Ridley was really good at in Atlanta. So it's just a fundamental misusing of the player's skill set with Calvin Ridley last year. And I think Gabe Davis fits what they want him to do. If you think back to Doug Peterson in the Philadelphia Eagles, right, when they won the Super Bowl and all that stuff, Alshon Jeffrey was one of the best wide receivers on that team, and he was not a separator, right? Gabe Davis does have speed. He can get open down the field. He's a quick guy, but he's also a contested catch kind of guy. So is Brian Thomas Jr. And, you know, you look at Alshon Jeffrey when he was in Philadelphia, he was a contested catch kind of guy. That's what Doug Peterson always wants. He wants one of those guys, and then he kind of wants a little bit of a more route running specialist, which is a Christian Kirk in this offense. That's going to be his 1 and 2 punch. So Gabe Davis, I think he's going to have around 110, 115 targets if he can play all 17 games. I do think they're going to use him more than the Buffalo Bills did. And you can say, oh, well, you know, why didn't the Buffalo Bills? He was playing all the snaps and all that stuff. Bills just, dude, they were a weird team last year. They switched OCs in the middle of the season, and things just got really weird for the receiving core. You know, everyone likes to say, oh, Stephon Diggs was not very good after the offensive coordinator shift. Yeah, it was really Gabe Davis. He had a couple of good games in there, but for the most part, there was a lot of games where he just didn't get any targets at all, or, you know, 2 targets, no catches down the field. I blame that a little bit more on the Buffalo Bills than on Gabe Davis. Now, again, he needs to prove it this year, but I do think he's set up. And again, for a 3rd-round pick, the upside on that is it's a throwaway pick, and the upside is a top 24 wide receiver. He's valued as a 66 wide receiver. That's, what, wide receiver 7 on most teams. I just think that the upside is so high for him, and people have completely given up on him, but I do think that the skill set is still there. Christian Kirk, the only reason I wouldn't be trying to buy in on him right now is just because of the whole contract thing that I already mentioned, right? Next year, he's going to be a $13 million savings on the cap. If they cut him, they could always re-sign him to a new deal. I don't see that happening. A lot of times the players don't want to take that big of a pay cut to stay on the team. So they could always sign him to an extension. I don't see it happening, especially given Christian Kirk and his health. He's been banged up a lot in his career, and it's not always his fault, but availability is the best ability. And I think that they're going to try and move on from him and let Brian Thomas Jr. take that primary number 2 slot next year, who he can play in the slot and he can play on the outside. And I think that's where they're going to love him in Jacksonville, and he doesn't have to do it right away. So I'm kind of out on Christian Kirk. It's not bad value. If you want to rent a receiver for this year, 205 is not a bad price point for Christian Kirk. He's only 27 years old too, so he can go somewhere else even if he doesn't come back to Jacksonville at 28 years old, and he can definitely have some value for your team. I think he's kind of a locked and loaded top 24, top 30 wide receiver, which is valuable in 3 wide receiver leagues or high flex leagues where you have 2, 3, 4 flex spots. So Christian Kirk is a valuable player. So I'm kind of okay with that price, but I would not be paying it personally. I'd be paying the upgrade price from 2.5 to the 111 to get Brian Thomas Jr. I just think that he's set up long term as well with Trevor Lawrence, and that's where him and Gabe Davis is going to be an interesting combination. They are very similar as well, and that's why I think people are really down on Gabe Davis to say, well, Brian Thomas Jr. is Gabe Davis. They're the same player, which, to be fair, they are, but I don't think that's going to negatively impact Gabe Davis. I think that there's going to be a role for both of these guys on this team. And again, Brian Thomas is kind of the future as well. So he's a lot more expensive, top 30 wide receiver already for Brian Thomas, and I'd be okay paying it. But just knowing that you're not going to get that value this year, in my opinion, I think it's going to be a 2025 investment that you're going to be getting. So maybe for Brian Thomas Jr., you wait until in season where he starts pretty slow. And a lot of people are wise to this nowadays, but you can try and kind of sell that. Hopefully, obviously if you win at the end of the first, it's a playoff contending team and they're just trying to make another run, hopefully. So maybe you can sell them somebody that will help them a lot more in 2025 or 2024, than 2025 with Brian Thomas. And you can kind of work something out that way. So maybe wait till in season for Brian Thomas. But again, I would not be afraid of investing in him for this roster, or for your roster for fantasy football. So next guy I want to talk about is going to be the running backs, and we'll go to Evan Ingram. We'll keep it with the pass catchers, and we'll save the running backs for the end. Evan Ingram is a very interesting tight end, currently ranked number 10. And again, part of the reason why I like him a lot for this year and the future, I think he's the number 3 option in this offense. And I think that with Christian Kirk potentially being gone next year, you can save $6 million by moving on from Evan Ingram next year. But Doug Peterson loves the tight end. He loves to have a valuable pass catcher in that position in his offense. And that's where I think that Evan Ingram is going to be valuable for fantasy football. Last year, he had 143 targets. Absolutely nuts. I don't think that's going to happen again. I think my prediction is Gabe Davis is going to have about 100 targets. I think that Christian Kirk is going to have, if he can stay healthy, that's the big thing that helped Evan Ingram last year was Christian Kirk got injured. But let's say Christian Kirk gets around 130 targets. Gabe Davis is around 110. Brian Thomas Jr. probably around 75 to 80 as a rookie. And then that's going to leave quite a few still for Evan Ingram. I think he'll be more around his 2022 Jacksonville season, which was around 100 versus 143. That is such a massive difference. But I think that he's going to be in line for a little bit of regression. I don't know if that's going to matter too much, though, if he gets 110 targets for 800 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns. He's still going to be valuable for the tight end position, especially given the injury rate of these guys and, how high the turnover is for a lot of these guys. He's not even 30 yet, so you've still got a couple more years before the big fall off for the tight ends. They can play forever. He's currently valued as the tight end number 10, right ahead of David Njoku, Jake Ferguson. I do think Jake Ferguson is massively undervalued for what it's worth. Travis Kelce's ahead of him, George Kittle, these kind of guys. So the question is George Kittle or Evan Ingram, and, George Kittle's been very hot or cold, and I guess Evan Ingram has as well. If you look at his game log from last year, not the most consistent again. Pretty high floor, but those ceiling games, man, those games where he just completely pops off, especially at the back half against Cleveland, he had 32 points, Cincinnati 23 points, Tampa Bay in your semifinals was 18 points. At the tight end position is just so valuable to have. So I think that the floor is super high with Evan Ingram, and he can always pop off for those big games as well. So I'd be taking him over George Kittle at this point in time, and I think that he is a potential league winner even with the reduction in targets, because you go back to 2022 in Jacksonville when he had 98 targets, 73 catches for 766 yards, 4 touchdowns, right? Mediocre, above average kind of tight end season. He was the tight end number 5 that year. He's valued at the tight end number 10. I think that it's just a net positive in value. So I'd be trying to invest in Evan Ingram a little bit right now. I think that he's going to outperform his current dynasty value and his current ranking, right? And again, the nice thing with Gabe Davis, with Christian Kirk, with Brian Thomas Jr., Evan Ingram, all these guys being good, right? And this offense being good and clicking is, it all feeds back to Trevor Lawrence, which is why I like Trevor Lawrence a lot for his price. Again, I think his price right now is the floor price, and that's the lowest it's ever going to be. If he hits, he's a top 7, top 8 guy for the rest of his career, and you're never going to have a chance to get him this cheap yet again. So I like Trevor Lawrence a lot. I like Evan Ingram a lot. I like a lot of these guys, to be honest. I think Jacksonville is going to win the AFC South this year. That's my hot take right now. Everyone's in on Houston, but man, I think that I think this team is kind of the dark horse that's going to roll right into the playoffs as the AFC South winner. All right, now the last position I wanted to talk about, I've already given my thoughts on Tank Bigsby in the year 2 running back episode, so go listen to those. Basically, I think that at the current price, he's basically free. The team has continued to verbally commit to him long term, and they're not giving up on him just yet. So throw whatever it takes to go get Tank Bigsby. Just go get him. Add him to your roster and just see what happens. And, what does it hurt for a 4th round pick? I don't think it hurts anything. So even a late 3rd, if you get a starting, a number 2 running back in this offense that I'm obviously hot on for fantasy football, it's not going to hurt anything. And so the team has continued to say that they want to reduce the workload for Travis Etienne, and they want to give Tank Bigsby another opportunity to show what he can do. At some point, you got to believe these guys, man. And that's the big thing. So, yeah, I do like the potential for Tank Bigsby, especially at cost. All right, now Travis Etienne, he's going to be interesting because they picked up his 5th-year option next year. It's going to be a pretty big cap hit. I think it'll be around $11 million if they keep him on the roster next year. So 1st-round pick, very good player. He obviously missed that first year with a torn ACL. Comes back in year 2, first year with Doug Peterson. Finishes the RB number 17. This last year finishes the RB number 3. Biggest thing that changed from year 2 to year 3 for him was touchdowns. He went from 5 rushing touchdowns in 2022 to 11 this last year. And the targets, man, the targets were the biggest piece. 45 in 2022 to 73 this last year. Not a massive increase in the receptions or the yardage, but man, if they can use him again, maybe they pull back the rushing attempts, because his efficiency did go down a little bit with the higher rushing usage, and that's where they want Tank Bigsby to kind of spell him a little bit more. But if they can put him out there and use him in the passing game like they did last year, that is so valuable for fantasy football. He's currently the running back number 6, though, and this is what scares me a little bit about Travis Etienne. I do worry a little bit that he's a little overvalued. Looking at my rankings for Travis Etienne, I currently have him as the running back number 10. This is including like Derrick Henry ahead of him, though, which is kind of a 1-year rental. Kyren Williams, I'm kind of cooling on a little bit given the injury and the Blake Corum news and all that stuff. So let's say those 2 guys kind of fall out and you're right around running back number 8. So he's not too much higher than my current ranking, but I just think that with the longevity of the running back position, I'm a little nervous about Etienne because he's already 25 years old. He'll play with the Jaguars through his year 26 season, and then he'll be a free agent at the age of 27. You got basically a very limited window left on him, and if he doesn't finish as a top 10 guy yet again, you're going to get burned pretty badly. So that's the only downside on Travis Etienne. So I probably would not be trying to buy in on him for his current cost, which is, right around the 104 to 105. You're basically paying you're talking about, in a 1 quarterback league, you're talking about Brock Bowers or Caleb Williams or even a Brian Thomas Jr., which it's not bad. It's not bad. It's fair, it feels like. But I just think the longevity of those other players, if they can hit on their value, is going to be so much more valuable to your team than Travis Etienne at his current age. So I don't love it. I don't love it at all. But yeah, so Travis Etienne, good player. I think he's going to be locked and loaded for another good year. He's going to be a top 10 guy as long as he can stay healthy, in my opinion. But longevity scares me just a little bit with him, where I'd be backing out if I could. I would not be selling Travis Etienne, but I don't know if I'd be buying him if I don't. If I need a running back really badly, again, I'd just go and buy Derrick Henry for a late first, 2025 first. Maybe you can get him for like 2 seconds or work something out that way, but Derrick Henry is going to be so much cheaper, and I think that he has just as much upside this year as Travis Etienne. He might have about the same longevity in terms of peak dynasty value. So just my thoughts on Travis Etienne. I don't dislike him. Again, I think it's a fair value for him right now. I just don't know if I'd be willing to pay it, is the only downside. So good player, and yeah, let me know what your thoughts on him are down below. But that's all the Jacksonville Jaguars. I like this offense. I do think that they're going to win the AFC South. So if you think I'm crazy, let me know down in the comments. And yeah, I'm excited to hear back from you guys. So one more time, please subscribe to the channel. Helps us out there. We love hearing from you guys in the comments and on Twitter at TDC_Calvin, at FF After Dark, and at Dynasty_Dale. So until next time, thank you guys so much for listening. Have a good night.
And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be?